Hey guys, what's going on? This is Michael Fordham from theoddsbreakers.com. This is going to be part one of a three-part series. I'm going to be breaking down all of these bowl games here over the next few weeks. This video is going to cover all of the bowl games through Christmas Day. I did leave three out. It was three games that involved teams I didn't really have an opinion about. But with that said, still breaking down 11 separate games in this video. I am going to leave timestamps in the description of this video if you want to flip over from game to game. And I'll probably clip my breakdowns of all these separate games and post them individually to my YouTube channel. Just before we get started, first of all, this is my first video on this channel. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything in the future. I do plan to have part two of this three-part series out on Sunday, December 26th, so the day after Christmas. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that. Also, like this video. I want as many people as possible to be able to see this video. I feel like I have some good angles on these games, so if you would, just take 1 second, like this video, and also feel free to comment anything if you disagree with something I say. If you have something to add to any of my breakdowns, feel free to comment down below as well. I'm also going to leave a few links down below. One of them, if you want to become a premium member through theoddsbreakers.com, we've got a good team of handicappers over there. I left the link to my membership page. You can just click that link and it'll take you right to my membership page. But we got a lot of good handicappers, and we're covering a lot of sports as well. So if you want to become a premium member, I'd appreciate that. You can check out the link to that in my description, and I do post free plays as well. I'm posting free plays almost every day. NBA, college football, and MLB once that season gets back. I'll leave the link to my free play page as well. If you want to be able to follow what I'm doing day to day, you might consider following me on Twitter. I'm at Fordham Gambling. I'll leave that link in the description below as well. You can track me day to day. I make sure to let everybody know when I have plays posted, so I'll leave the link to my Twitter below as well. With that said, let's get right into it. All right, guys. So first game I wanted to touch on here is going to kick off bowl season here on Friday night for us. Friday night at 5 p.m. Central Time. This is the Cure Bowl in Orlando, Florida. We've got Coastal Carolina against Northern Illinois. As I see it right now, Coastal Carolina laying 10.5 points. Total sitting at 63.5 right now. So I'm just going to be upfront. I'm not going to give out a ton of premium plays here on this YouTube show. But I will give out this one. I didn't have a play on the first game here on Friday, so I wanted to go ahead and give you guys this one. I am going to be on Coastal Carolina here. I'll kind of break down how I handicap this game and give y'all that. And it's probably going to be a multi-unit play too. I really like Coastal Carolina in this spot. Just looking at the Chants this year, they went 10-2. If you remember last year, they went undefeated in the regular season. Ended up losing that bowl game. I think it was the Cure Bowl last year to Liberty. And they followed it up with a nice 10-2 season. If you look at those two losses though, lost those two games by a combined 5 points. So they were in those games. In my opinion, they're right up there with App State as the best pure teams in that Sun Belt Conference. And I believe in one of those losses, they didn't have their quarterback, Grayson McCall. And he is a total X factor. If you look at McCall this year, 73% completion rate. But I think this is more important. 12.1 yards per attempt. I use that stat a lot to see how effective quarterbacks are, that yards per attempt stat. I think completion percentage is important, but what yards per attempt really shows, it kind of combines that efficiency also with how explosive that quarterback is through the air. I think 7.5 or 8 is probably what I'd consider pretty average. Probably more like 7.5. So we're seeing him at 12.1 yards per attempt. That means that he is incredibly efficient through the air, but he's also this Chants offense is also able to create quite a bit of chunk plays through the air. And the other good thing about McCall is he's able to use his legs as well. He's not just a pure pocket passer. Typically in this day and age, the people tend to highlight guys who are able to pass the ball well and offenses that have these high-profile passing attacks. But really, when Coastal Carolina has success, they're running the ball really well. They got 3 running backs who have amassed 500-plus yards this season, in addition to McCall, who's good on the ground. Just looking at how efficient they run the ball, it's really led to them being one of the most efficient offenses in the country, converting 54% of the time on third down. That's good for second in all of college football. When I look at Northern Illinois, yes, I know they won the MAC. Yes, I know they've kind of come on here as of late, but they're pretty vulnerable defensively, yielding almost 33 points per game. I think they're going to have a hard time stopping what's a pretty multiple Coastal Carolina offense. If Northern Illinois is able to kind of stymie that Coastal Carolina run game, then I trust Grayson McCall. 73% passer, 12.1 yards per attempt, and they're able to run the ball. I think they've just got so many options. I think it's going to be too much for the Huskies to handle. I will give Northern Illinois credit. They've been pretty good offensively this year. Looking at their quarterback situation, they got Rocky Lombardi, who, if you remember him from his time at Michigan State, was not very good there. I wouldn't say he's setting the world on the fire this year. Just 7.7 yards per attempt, which, as we just talked about, is pretty average. And he's only completing 58% of his passes, so he's not really lighting the world on fire. But if you look at this Huskies team, they really rely on their run game. They got Jay Ducker, who's a true freshman, over 1,000 yards here in his freshman campaign. And then they also rely on two other running backs who each have at least 98 carries this season. That run-heavy formula might work against the MAC schedule, but just looking at how Coastal sets up defensively, they've allowed just 20 points per game this season, playing in a pretty good conference there in the Sun Belt. And just looking at the way their defense is set up, very experienced at linebacker. They got Teddy Gallagher, who was coming off a really good year last year, and I believe has kept it up this year. And frankly, if Northern Illinois can't run the ball, then they just don't have a quarterback who's going to be able to keep up with what Coastal Carolina is going to do. This is just an all-Coastal game. I'll take Coastal Carolina minus 10.5. Like I said, that's going to be a premium play for me. I'm not going to give too many premium plays out through this YouTube series, but I thought just to kick it off, this is early, one of the first bowl games this season. I thought I'd go ahead and give you all that. It's probably going to be multi-unit play. I don't know if I want to go 2 units right out of the gate here in bowl season, and I haven't locked it up yet. It's still Wednesday. Still want to do a little more due diligence on this, but it's probably going to be a 1.5 unit play for me. I like Coastal Carolina minus a 10.5. I think it's straightforward, and I'm going to go ahead and play that. All right, so with that, now we move on to Saturday, and let me tell you, this Saturday slate is loaded slate, and we'll get it here very early in the morning. We got Appalachian State versus Western Kentucky. See the Mountaineers laying 3 right now. Total sitting at 68. This is a 10 a.m. Central Time game. I'm going by Central. I live in Texas. This is a great game right out of the gate. It's the Boca Raton Bowl. It's going to be played at Florida Atlantic Stadium. These are 2 of the better Group of 5 teams we've seen this year. I've been involved with both these teams a lot this season. I feel like I know these teams well. Both these teams are kind of in a similar spot right now. Both played for their conference title game, and neither was able to pull it out. If you look at Appalachian State, they had a 10-win season, which has become pretty standard for them. But like I said, they lost in that Sun Belt Championship game to Louisiana. That was a team they got smoked by earlier in the season and weren't able to avenge that loss. So they're somewhat disappointed coming in. And if you look at Western Kentucky, they're 8-5. That does not tell the full story about this Hilltopper team. They played Michigan State, Army, Indiana, and UTSA twice this year. Didn't find a way to win any of those games, but this is one of the better Group of 5 teams in the country. And just looking at the way Western Kentucky sets up offensively, I've been trying to tell you guys for a long time. I mean, this is an absolute juggernaut offensively. 43 points per game, 4th in college football. You look at their quarterback, Bailey Zappi. This will be his last college game. He threw for 5,500 yards this year, 56 touchdowns, and on top of that, completing 69% of his passes, 8.7 yards per attempt. This guy can do it all. Obviously, throwing for 5,500 yards, you got to have some good talent at wide receiver. They got Jareth Stearns, 137 catches, 1,700 yards, 14 touchdowns. Michael Tinsley, 80 receptions, 1,300 yards, 12 touchdowns. And they got 2 other wide receivers right around 700-yard mark, and those guys have combined for 15 touchdowns as well. So this passing offense is exceptional. Now, they don't run the football very much. They don't have a running back this year who's gotten to that 100 carry mark. So this is a pretty one-dimensional offense, but hey, it's worked. Obviously, 43 points per game. I know they're playing in a weak conference, but like I said, they've played Michigan State, they've played Indiana, Army, UTSA, and they've been able to move the ball on all those teams, right? So I see no reason why they can't do so against Appalachian State. I will say App State is allowing less than 20 points per game this season, but they haven't faced an offense like this. Most of the Sun Belt teams aren't, pass heavy. Looking at Louisiana, they like to run the ball a lot. They go slow. Even looking at Coastal Carolina, like we just talked about, they're a run-first team. They're very efficient in the passing game, but they're not some prolific passing offense like this Western Kentucky team is. So, and the other thing about Appalachian State, I think the Sun Belt is a good conference, but there's a lot of bad teams in there. And if you look at App State, the way their season played out, I think those defensive stats are somewhat padded by some of those lower-level conference games they played. So I do think Western Kentucky will have success offensively. That being said, as good as Western Kentucky's offense is, If you're scoring 43 points per game and you're 8-5, then that's pretty telling. Their defense is not good. It's they're only giving up 28 points per game, but that really doesn't do it justice. If you look at all the good offenses they've played, they gave up 52 to UTSA, and then they just gave up 49 to them 2 weeks ago in the conference title game. Gave up 48 to Michigan State, 33 to Indiana, 38 to Army. To make matters worse for the Hilltoppers defense, they're going to be missing their starting defensive tackle and their starting linebackers. So they'll be playing from behind the 8 ball in a matchup that already didn't set up well for them. Now, if you look at the way this App State offense is set up, they've got a familiar name at quarterback, Chase Bryce. He was back at Clemson there for a few years. Played at Duke last year, now at App State. He's had a pretty good season, I'd say. 8.2 yards per attempt, 62% completion rate. But what's plagued him throughout his career, and it's kind of plagued him in some of App State's bigger games this year, he's thrown 10 picks. He's a 5th, 6th-year guy. You just can't have that. However, what App State does really well that I think will carry them into this game, and it will travel, is they run the ball well. Really good 1-2 punch at running back. You look at Nate Noel, Cam Peoples. They basically split the load there. Those guys combined for 5.5 yards per carry, which is very efficient. 1,900 yards on the year, 18 touchdowns. So this is a team that can run the ball really well. I will say their top wide receiver is out, but they do have 2 other wide receivers who have at least 50 catches and 750 yards on the season. So I don't think that'll be too much of an issue. And looking at their O-line too, I think they'll be able to win that battle in the trenches with the Western Kentucky D-line, especially with Western Kentucky's top D lineman out. One thing that could come into play in this game is pace. Western Kentucky goes at a maniacally fast pace. They throw the ball a lot. I think Appalachian State's going to have a lot of possessions to work with, so even if Bryce does turn the ball over a time or two, even if they aren't great on third down, I think they're going to get enough shots offensively to where eventually this offense is going to find a rhythm, and I think they're going to be able to have some success in this game. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned yet that I probably should. So Western Kentucky, they've got a lot of turnover on this coaching staff right now. Their offensive coordinator is going to Texas Tech after this game. He's already been hired there. They've got different guys in their staff kind of rolling around, and you'll see this a lot during bowl season. But you kind of have to track these things because these coaches might not be all the way there. It's a bowl game. It's the Boca Raton Bowl. Do I really want to pour all my resources into this, or do I want to focus on recruiting, focus on my new job? It's just something you have to take note of. I'm not saying that means Western Kentucky won't be ready to play. I'm just saying that's present. Just take that into consideration. As far as my pick in this game, if I had to take a side, I think I'd lean with Appalachian State. They play in the better conference. I know I just said Western Kentucky's offense would travel anywhere, but just looking at Western Kentucky's defense, I think eventually App State's going to find a way to just run all over them. It's going to open up the passing game for Chase Bryce. I think this App State defense is talented enough to adjust to this pass-heavy offense. Like I said, as many points as Western Kentucky can put up, they're 8-5 for a reason. This is another tough matchup for them. It's a short number here for App State. I think App State's a better team. I think if I had to lean one way, I'd probably lay the 3 with the Mountaineers here. All right, guys, directly after that Western Kentucky App State game, we got Fresno State taking on UTEP here in the New Mexico Bowl in Albuquerque. I'm seeing Fresno State as 11.5-point favorites. I'm seeing the total at 51. Now, I'm just going to be honest. This is a game where if Fresno State shows up motivated, they show up ready to go, they're the much better team. They should cover this number. With that being said, if you followed college football here in the last few weeks, you know that things have been a little rocky in Fresno here recently. They lost their head coach to the University of Washington when that job opened up. And I think this is more important when you're talking about this game, their starting quarterback, Jake Haener, he entered the transfer portal hoping to go to Washington. Apparently something happened there. He's going to return to Fresno State. But as far as this game goes, his status is completely unclear at this time. Him being in the portal, he wasn't able to practice early on during this bowl prep, so nobody really knows if he's going to go this game. As far as Fresno State's season, they went 9-3, but I have to feel like they're somewhat disappointed with how things finished. If you just take a look at how their season started, they had a 7-point loss to Oregon, who ended up making the Pac-12 championship game. They went on the road, they beat UCLA outright, but then they followed that up with losses at Hawaii. And then in a competitive game against Boise State, they get absolutely steamrolled 40-14. This seemed to be like a team that was destined to make the Mountain West title game. And now that they fell short of that, I have to wonder how excited they are to come play this New Mexico Bowl against UTEP. Now, I know UTEP's not a bottom feeder anymore. They went 7-5 this season, but they are not entering this game in good current form. Lost 4 of their last 5 games. And frankly, like I already mentioned with Western Kentucky, Playing in the Conference USA, it's just a weak conference. There's no way around it. They did play a Mountain West opponent, pretty similar to Fresno State stature. They went on the road early in the season and played Boise State, and that wasn't a very good Boise State team at the time, and they were totally non-competitive. Lost that game 54-13. Did not have a chance. If you look at this UTEP minor offense, very mediocre, 25 points per game. Quarterback Gavin Hardison kind of had an up and down season, 17 touchdowns, but he did have 12 interceptions, which is going to be a killer. He only completed 56% of his passes, but 8.9 yards per attempt, which is above average. Shows that, maybe this UTEP offense is able to stretch the field vertically a little bit. And that would seem to fall in line when you look at Jacob Cowling, who's UTEP's leading receiver. 67 receptions, 1,330 yards, 7 touchdowns this year. I do think UTEP might be able to hit on some deep shots, but just looking at this Fresno State defense, you have to give them credit. Allowed just 20 points per game this season, playing in a pretty tough conference in the Mountain West. I feel like Fresno State's one of those teams that's definitely more talked about for their offense, but you have to give their defense credit. They played pretty well this year. With that being said, without any clarity around whether Jake Haener is going to play this game, I really don't know what to expect from this Fresno State offense. If you look at Haener, 67% completion this year, 8.5 yards per attempt, threw for 3,800 yards and 32 touchdowns. He's a veteran. He's an experienced guy. If you look at what Fresno has behind him, they got 2 freshman quarterbacks who can't be trusted to replace that production from Haener. The other thing that gives me worry about this Fresno State side is, so if they're having to rely on these younger quarterbacks, their running game is pretty inconsistent this year. They've got 2 guys who carry the bulk of the load, Jordan Mims and Ronnie Rivers. They each had a big game or two, but if you look at the majority of their games, they were held in check. They had some monster games, don't get me wrong, but I feel like that almost padded their stats a little bit. Most of the time, these running backs are held in check. I say all that to say this game is a total pass for me until we have any clarity around Jake Haener and Fresno State. Now, that being said, if Haener's ruled in and this line moves up, I still don't know how motivated Fresno State is to play in the New Mexico Bowl, especially after beating a team like UCLA in the Rose Bowl this year. This just seems like a flat spot for a team like Fresno State. I can't bet on UTEP. I just don't think they're a good team. So this is probably going to end up being a total pass for me. All right, guys, next up, 2:30 Central Time on Saturday. We got BYU and UAB, one of the better games of the day. Right now I'm seeing BYU land 7, and the total posted at 54.5. This is the Independence Bowl in Shreveport, Louisiana. Frankly, I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. I'm a little bit surprised to see BYU playing in the Independence Bowl. It's typically not one of the higher thought of bowl games. I thought BYU was a good team this year. They went 10-2, but I think the reason they should probably be playing in a better bowl game, 6 Power 5 wins this year, and it's not just bad Power 5 teams. They beat Utah, beat Arizona State, Washington State, Virginia, and then obviously USC and Arizona don't look as good now, but that's 6 Power 5 wins for an independent team. They did lose at Baylor, which that loss doesn't really mean anything now given how good Baylor's looked. And they also dropped one to Boise State, but those games came back-to-back weeks. For the majority of the season, this BYU team has played like a top 15 team. If you look at UAB on the other hand, pretty pedestrian 8-4 year. I had pretty high expectations for UAB. I know that they had the whole fiasco with their athletic program getting shut down a few years ago, but this is a team the last few years has been pretty competitive. I thought they might be ready to take that next step, especially playing in a weak conference. But they just kind of had a meh 8-4 year. I'll tell you now, one thing that you have to note in this game is UAB running back Dwayne McBride. He's got 1,200 yards this year. He's been the staple of their offense. He's currently questionable for this game. So I would wait. And if you follow me on Twitter at Fordham Gambling, I'll let you know if I hear anything on my end. But that's a guy who's going to move the line one way or the other. His status. Now I'll say this: if you look at UAB's offense, while McBride has had a great year, they do have depth behind him. Looking at backup running back Jermaine Brown Jr., just over 5 yards per carry this season, got 115 carries. And he punched in 7 touchdowns. So if McBride can't go, I'd have to think there will certainly be a drop-off, but maybe it's not as big of a drop-off as maybe the market would think. UAB quarterback Dylan Hopkins stepped in, pretty early in the season. I think it was the 3rd game of the year. And he had a pretty good year for the Blazers. Completed 64% of his passes, 9.8 yards per attempt, which is very good. Only 173 yards per game. So while he is efficient through the air, while he is able to strike on those deep balls, he's not a high volume passer. They do rely much more on their run game. One thing that's going to be crucial in deciding this game is how that UAB O-line matches with the BYU defensive line. If you look at the Blazers, a fared up front, they've allowed 28 sacks on Hopkins this season, which is not great. They're facing a physical team in BYU, but one thing about this BYU team, they forced only 4 sacks over their last 5 games. They play much more of a bend, don't break style of defense. That style of play has had mixed results for them this season. They're giving up 24 points per game. They gave up 27 to South Florida, which is not very impressive. Gave up 38 to Baylor, and then 49 to Virginia, who I know Virginia is a high-flying offense, but they've been held in check by plenty of teams this year. People think of this BYU team as being, super solid and stout defensively, but, some of their numbers suggest otherwise. Now, if we look at BYU offensively, I'd say they're okay. Look at quarterback Jaron Hall, 2,600 yards this year, 64% completion, 8.7 yards per attempt. I'd say that's above average. 20 touchdowns versus 5 interceptions. Definitely good to see the young quarterback taking care of the football. One thing about Hall also is he's able to use his legs a little bit too. He added 307 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground this year. This is another team, though, which I think this will be a theme throughout this video, as we see a lot of these teams. They rely heavily on their ground game. If you look at BYU running back Tyler Algier, 249 carries this season. He had over 1,400 yards, putting him at 5.6 yards per carry. This is BYU offensive line. I kind of knocked their defensive line a little bit. Aside from that Baylor game, this BYU offensive line has had their way. While BYU has been able to run the ball and win up front against most of their schedule, I kind of have some doubts about whether they'll be able to do that against UAB. If you look at this Blazers defense, allowing less than 23 points per game this season, I think they're one of the better group of 5 defenses that we see in the country. Back when they played UTSA, if you know anything about UTSA, who we'll actually talk about in this video, their running back Sincere McCormick is a very high volume guy. This UAB team held him to just 20 carries for 65 yards. And then also, when this UAB team played Marshall, we'll also talk about them in this video as well, their running back, Rasheen Ali, just 16 carries for 41 yards. Now, I understand that BYU is probably better up front than both UTSA and Marshall, but this is a UAB team that's proven they can stop the run. It's been really their staple all year, and I think while Algier might be able to get his yards, I don't think he's going to break off too many explosive runs. And I think BYU is going to have to really earn their points. After breaking down this game, I really don't have a great feel on this side. I think this number is probably right. BYU, just their style of offense, they don't go very fast. Neither of these teams do really, which you'll see in a second. But I'm not really in love with laying big numbers with this BYU team. This is not a big number, but I think this UAB team is better than people think. I wouldn't talk anybody off of, maybe teasing BYU down if you wanted to make a teaser for Saturday or something like that. I'm personally not going to do that because I do see a world in which UAB can find a way to win this game. While I won't have a play on this side, I do see some value in this under 54.5. Looking at UAB, they rank 123rd out of 130 teams in plays per game, so they are in no rush. BYU ranks a little higher than that, but they're in the bottom half of college football in pace as well. You just heard me praise that UAB defense, and while I did raise some questions about that BYU defense, they've still been pretty good this year. I'm being a little nitpicky. They're still a 10-2 team. They still had plenty of good performances this year. And playing against the UAB team that played a pretty weak schedule, I do think we'll see that balance out a little bit. 54.5, it seems a little bit high for me. I think maybe around 50 is probably a fair number. This is one that would probably be a free play. However, at this number, I do think this is worth a play. So I haven't locked it up yet, but I'm probably going to lock this one up as a free play. I think I like the under in this game. All right, guys, next game I wanted to get to, Liberty versus Eastern Michigan. This is at 4:45 p.m. Central Time on Saturday. This is the Lending Tree Bowl in Mobile, Alabama. I'm seeing Liberty as 9.5-point favorites over Eastern Michigan, total at 58.5 at the moment. I got to be honest, this Liberty team, in my opinion, one of the most disappointing teams in the country this year. Dropped their last 3 games of the season, had a bad loss to Louisiana Monroe. They were frankly just uncompetitive in some games. I expected them to maybe even win. Lost 42-12 to Louisiana and then lost 31-16 to Army. Finished the season 7-5. They have this quarterback Malik Willis, supposed to be a first round pick in the upcoming draft. I was expecting a lot better than 7-5 out of them this year. Over that final 3-game losing streak that I just mentioned, they averaged just 15 points per game during that stretch. I've already brought up Malik Willis. This is a guy that pro scouts are very high on. Wouldn't say he had a bad year necessarily. 35 total touchdowns, 24 through the air, as well as 11 on the ground. Threw for 2,600 yards, and he ran for another 820 yards. A very mobile quarterback. That being said, completed just 61.6% of his passes, and he threw 12 interceptions. That's really what kind of plagued this Liberty team this year. Doesn't have a bad yards per attempt at 8.3. yards per attempt, so that's slightly above average in my mind. That being said, doesn't have a lot of help around him. And I'll get to a pretty astounding stat in a second, but I'll start with the running back room. This is a group that's been pretty inconsistent this year. They amassed for just 10 touchdowns, and they're starting running back Joshua Mack just 4.2 yards per carry this season, which that might fly in the NFL, but in college football, 4.2 yards per carry is just not going to get it done. His two leading wide receivers are both freshmen, so there's quite a bit of youth around him as well. But this is something I wanted to get to right here. O-line allowed 50 sacks this season. 50 sacks. That's over 4 sacks a game, and that's considering that Malik Willis is a very mobile quarterback as well. They're having a hard time running the ball with their running backs, and he's getting sacked over 4 times a game. This offensive line group is absolutely atrocious. I frankly just don't know how they're going to match up against this Eastern Michigan team. If you look at this Eastern Michigan team, allowed 28 points per game this season. I've already said I'm not really a MAC guy. I don't really follow the MAC at all. I know more about teams like Buffalo, some of the upper echelon teams. Not claiming to be some Eastern Michigan insider. But I will say, just looking through some of their box scores this year, they've been pretty vulnerable against the run. So I would expect Willis to have a good game, but at the same time, if you're getting sacked on average over 4 times a game, it's going to be hard to beat anybody. I don't think Liberty's all bad. If you think of Hugh Freeze, their head coach, you think high-flying offenses and all that, but this Liberty defense has been pretty good this year. Allowing just 21.5 points per game. Like I said, a better defense than you might think. They'll match up with an Eastern Michigan offense that themselves can't run the ball too well either. Of their 2 running backs who have at least 70 carries this season, they're both averaging less than 4 yards per carry, and that's against MAC competition. So Liberty's running backs aren't very good, but this Eastern Michigan running back room isn't great either. They don't have much mass outside at wide receiver. I don't think they'll be able to beat Liberty deep, especially considering their quarterback Ben Bryant just 7.9 yards per attempt this season against a MAC schedule. This Eastern Michigan offensive line is no good themselves. They've allowed 37 sacks by themselves. Now, when you're matching up against a team that's allowed 50, it looks a little bit better, but that's not a good number. And it doesn't help that Eastern Michigan quarterback Ben Bryant's not very mobile either. Not a big part of the run game. So, frankly, I think Liberty's going to be able to get some stops here. Their defense has been pretty good this year. I see no reason why they won't show out here. I'll say this, as far as a play in this game, the only way I could play this game is Liberty. This is a much easier matchup for them than I know they're an independent team, but they put together a pretty good schedule this year. I think this will be a much easier matchup for them. Willis should be able to have himself a pretty nice game, and I think there's urgency there for Willis to have a good game because I think every NFL organization will be watching Saturday. I think this is a team that's much better than they've shown this year, but at the same time, you've got to show it. You're 7-5. You've got this first round caliber quarterback, but you're just not very good elsewhere. I don't think the under would be a bad look, but like I said, I do think there's a chance that Malik Willis has a nice game. Hugh Freeze might open up the playbook here in the bowl game. At the end of the day, I don't think I'm going to have a play in this game. If I did, it would either be Liberty, maybe a team total over, or maybe I'd lay it with them. I still want to see how the market reacts to this game. It's not really one of my stronger reads of the day. But I would not be surprised if Liberty and Malik Willis had themselves a night. All right, guys, next up, here on Saturday night, 6:30 p.m. Central Time, we've got the LA Bowl. It's going to be a pretty good matchup here between Oregon State and Utah State. Game's going to be played at SoFi Stadium, so that brand new stadium where the Chargers and the Rams both play. Seeing Oregon State 7-point favorites right now, total at 67, so pretty high. Just looking at this Oregon State team and having been involved with them a few times this year, extremely inconsistent. Really don't know what you're going to get from them week to week. On one hand, really bad losses to teams like Colorado and Cal, 2 teams who didn't make bowl games, but then they turn back around and beat a team that's playing in the Rose Bowl like Utah. They beat them, beat a good Arizona State team. So and there was a point at this season where the Oregon State run defense was historically bad. They seem to fix it a little bit, but I'm not so sure. Very inconsistent team, hard to trust them. Looking on the other hand at Utah State, probably one of the best coaching jobs in college football. Blake Anderson in year 1, coming over from Arkansas State. With all the blue bloods in the Mountain West, Boise State, Nevada, Fresno State, San Diego State, Utah State in year 1 under Blake Anderson is able to win the Mountain West. They win 7 of their last 8 games, and in that Mountain West championship game, beat San Diego State, who was 11-1 coming into that game. They beat them 46-13. So this is a team that got really hot towards the end of the year. If you ask them, probably didn't want to have this 2 week break in between games. They're hot, but they're in great current form right now, and they should keep that rolling into this game. Looking at what's made Utah State successful this year, really good offense. And they go fast too. They run almost 79 plays per game. It's ninth in college football. Really good quarterback in Logan Bonner. Threw for over 3,500 yards this year, 36 touchdowns. Did have 11 interceptions, but when you're going that fast, you're having that much success through the air, you get a little more margin for error. Only completed 61% of his passes, but a pretty respectable yards per attempt at 8.5. You got some weapons to work with on the outside. Looking at their top receiver, Devin Tompkins, almost 100 receptions, finished with 96. Almost 1,600 yards, 9 touchdowns. He's a little 5'8", 155 guy in the slot. They get him out in space, and he's had a fantastic season. But it's not just him. The Utah State's also got 2 other wide receivers with at least 750 yards and 9 touchdowns this year. So a lot of production from those athletes on the outside, and Bonner's done a good job with them. The one drawback from this Utah State offense is they don't run the ball particularly well. Pretty mediocre there. Their 2 leading rushers are right around 4.5 yards per carry, which is pretty meh in college football. There's different standards between the NFL and college. 4.5 yards per carry in college is not too good. Like I said, Oregon State, there was a time this season where their run defense was just putrid. They did seem to, kind of find some momentum late in the year. I mentioned that they beat Arizona State, held them to 10 points. They also held down Stanford, who was really bad towards the end of the year. But, in that last game against Oregon, we had a 2-unit best bet on Oregon, -7 that game. Anthony Brown was able to move the ball at will. They basically got everything they wanted. So this Oregon State defense is not good. They've shown some promise, but the reality of it is I can't trust them in this matchup, especially considering Utah State moves with pace. They've got good athletes on the outside, and they've been able to score points all year. That being said, Oregon State's had some success offensively this year, and it's really been through their run game. Looking at B.J. Baylor, this guy emerged big time this year. He ended up finishing first team All Pac-12 at running back, so really good year for him. 6 yards per carry. You're talking about playing, Power 5 college football. Finishing 6 yards per carry, that's really impressive. 1,259 yards, 13 touchdowns. Chance Nolan, their quarterback, he's all right. Right around 200 yards per game, so they're not depending on him too much. Fairly efficient, 63.5% completion, 8.4 yards per attempt. And the other thing about Nolan that is an advantage for him, almost 300 yards on the ground as a runner and 3 touchdowns. I also like this Oregon State offensive line. They allowed just 3 sacks over their final 5 games, and I think this is very important. This Beavers offense converting over 50% of the time on third down. That's they're a top 10 third down offense in college football. As far as Utah State defensively, definitely not what led their late season surge. They allowed over 25 points per game this season, which is pretty mediocre. Did play 2 tough non-conference games, and I think that's telling as to how they'll match up with Oregon State. Played Washington State in that game, allowed 26 carries for 149 yards, so almost 6 yards a carry. And then against BYU, Ty Algier, who we mentioned earlier in that BYU breakdown, he went off against this Utah State defense. 22 carries, 218 yards. So B.J. Baylor is a first-team all-conference kind of guy. This seems to be a pretty juicy matchup for him. I think both of these offenses really should have their way. I wish this total wasn't as high as it was. I wish it was maybe mid to lower 60s. The over in this game is my best look at this point. As far as the side, I'll tell you this: I wouldn't want to play against Utah State right now. They're very hot. Like I said, coming in, they won their conference kind of unpredictably. And frankly, I'm not going to lay 7 with a team like Oregon, who's while their highs might be up here, they've been really bad at times. With that being said, I'm not going to make it official at this point, but if I had to play this game right now, I'd probably play that over 67. I like the way both of these offenses match up with some pretty vulnerable defenses. All right, guys, next up, this is our last game here for Saturday. We got another good one here. Louisiana, also known as Louisiana Lafayette, is taking on Marshall. This game is in New Orleans at the Superdome in the New Orleans Bowl. 8:15 p.m. Central Time kickoff. We're seeing the Ragin' Cajuns laying 5 right now. Total at 55.5, pretty standard. Just looking at this Louisiana team, they lost their opener at Texas, weren't really competitive in that game, but they've won 12 straight games. It hasn't always been pretty, but you got to tip your cap. They've won 12 straight games. One thing that's really important to note here, obviously their head coach Billy Napier is off to Florida. He did coach the conference championship game, but he will not coach Louisiana in this game. And maybe even as important, he'll bring 4 to 6 staff members with him from that Louisiana staff who don't expect to coach in this bowl game either. I'll just say this. I don't want to call it a lucky 12-1, but they played some very close games that they were fortunate to walk away with a win in. 7 of their 12 wins came by one possession. It's one thing to beat Appalachian State, who's a pretty good team, by one possession, but they're beating Nicholls State, Georgia Southern, South Alabama, Arkansas State, Louisiana Monroe. All those games are one possession games. So I know they're 12-1, but this is not a team that really dominated at all this year. Played a lot of close games, and frankly, might consider themselves lucky to be 12-1. On the other hand, we got a Marshall team. I was pretty high on them coming into the season. They got a young quarterback in Grant Wells, who we'll talk about in a second, but fairly disappointing 7-5 season. I think they're a better team than that record might indicate. They were competitive in their losses, 3-1 possession losses to East Carolina, Appalachian State, and UAB. And they're in the first year under head coach Charles Huff, so maybe get a little bit of a pass there. I think this is a pretty talented team. I mentioned Grant Wells earlier, a sophomore quarterback. He started as a true freshman last year, and I think we saw him get better this year. Averaged 286 yards a game. Threw for 16 touchdowns, and he also added 7 on the ground as well. The one thing with Wells that kind of plagued him at times last year is he does have a knack to turn over the ball a little bit. Threw 12 interceptions this year, but I will say this, and I think this is important to note, over his final 5 games, just 2 interceptions. So he did seem to improve in that area as the year went on. This is a Marshall offense too. They're averaging 34 points per game this season. They're also averaging 471 yards per game, which is good for 18th in the country. So this is a high flying offense, and I think Louisiana might be surprised at just how tough a matchup this really is. Not only can Wells do it through the air, but this Marshall team's got a pretty good run game as well. They got a running back, Rasheen Ali, who we mentioned earlier, just a freshman, and he had a breakout year. Ran for almost 1,250 yards, added 20 touchdowns on the ground as a freshman. Almost 5.5 yards per carry, so really consistent for a guy that young, and he definitely provided a spark for them this year. They got plenty of options to work with at wide receiver, and they're pretty solid up front. But this is a tough matchup with this Louisiana defense. One of the most experienced defenses in the country, had a lot of returning production heading into the year. A big reason why they were able to win a lot of those close games. This is a defense allowing just 18.3 points per game. I mentioned Appalachian State and how they matched up with them earlier. They played Appalachian State twice this year. I think Appalachian State's a good team. They allowed just 16 and 13 points to the Mountaineers in those 2 games. So this is a good defense, really good defense. And they certainly needed that defense to get some of these wins because this Louisiana offense was pretty lackluster in my mind this year. Just 36.5% conversion rate on third down, which is very low for a team that, with a senior quarterback. That quarterback, Levi Lewis, pretty underwhelming season in my mind. Averaged just over 200 yards per game through the air. A good touchdown to interception ratio, 19 touchdowns as opposed to just 4 interceptions. But he only completed 60% of his passes and just 7.4 yards per attempt. So really not a big threat down the field at all. I will say the one thing about Lewis's game, he's another one of these guys. He's pretty mobile. He added 5 touchdowns on the ground, so that's certainly an element to his game that does help the Raging Cajuns. As for the Louisiana run game, their top running back, Chris Smith, he is questionable in this game. I will say, even if Smith can't go, this is a Louisiana running back room that's very deep. Their second option, Montrell Johnson, he ran for 784 yards this year and 11 touchdowns. So they've got plenty behind him. And they have a guy in Amani Bailey. He ran for over 100 yards in that Sun Belt Championship game. So if there was an area on this Louisiana roster where they could afford to have a starter go down, it'd probably be that running back position. We already talked about Louisiana struggling on third down. Part of that's because their O-line has sputtered a little bit here late in the season. Over their last 5 games, allowing 12 sacks. Lewis, who is a mobile quarterback, has still been under some pressure. Frankly, I can't get a good read on how Marshall's going to match up in this game. They did allow less than 23 points per game this season, but, a lot of weak competition there in the Conference USA. And they were torched to a certain degree in their non-conference games against, similar opponents to Louisiana. As I look at how I'm going to approach this game, I really think the best way to play this game, and I'm not a huge advocate for teasers in college football. I probably play them too much if we're being honest, but I think if you teased Marshall up to plus 11 in this spot, obviously Louisiana's laying 5, so you tease that up to Marshall plus 11. I think that's a good look. We've seen Louisiana play a lot of close games this year. I can trust a Marshall offense. They operate in more ways than one. They got a good quarterback. They got a young running back who's been really good this year. I think Marshall's going to keep this game close, possibly find themselves with a chance to win the game late. As far as the total goes, mentioning that Louisiana defense, I could definitely see an under here, just with, Louisiana tends to play some lower scoring games. I do expect to a certain degree Louisiana might have some more success against the Marshall defense that, frankly is still unproven to me. Playing in the Conference USA, this is a step up in competition for the Thundering Herd defense. I feel more comfortable in Marshall being able to keep this a one possession game. That's my best look as of now. But if you had to play a total here, I definitely lean towards the under right now. All right, guys, that's it for the Saturday slate. So now we move on to Monday. We have a standalone game on Monday night, December 20th. It's actually Monday afternoon, 1:30 p.m. Central kickoff. We've got the Myrtle Beach Bowl played at Coastal Carolina. We got Tulsa and Old Dominion. Not the most exciting game ever. Looking right now, I see Tulsa as 9.5-point favorites, and the total sitting at 52.5. Really disappointing season in my mind for Tulsa. Went 6-6. I will say this: it started off a lot worse than it finished. They were 3-6 at one point. They won their last 3 games, and that included a win on the road at SMU. Definitely a good finish to the season. And frankly, they were also competitive in some of their other games. Just in week 2, they played Oklahoma State to a one-possession game. As for Old Dominion, kind of followed that same path. They started the year 1-6, and they won their final 5 games. And really what changed for Old Dominion is when they switched to Hayden Wolf at quarterback, their season completely turned around. Played half a season, so just 9 touchdowns, and he did throw 6 interceptions. Pretty respectable numbers, 62% completion, 7.8 yards per attempt. This is an Old Dominion team that does play with a little bit of tempo. 74 plays per game this season, good for 34th. Definitely that top quarter in pace throughout the college football landscape. This is another team, though, and I feel like this is a theme throughout this video. Very run-heavy team. They have a 1,000-yard rusher in Blake Watson, 5.1 yards per carry, too, so pretty effective. And then their backup also added 568 yards and 5.5 yards per carry. So this is an Old Dominion team that has found some success on the ground. I will say their O-line isn't great at protecting the quarterback. It did allow 12 sacks on Wolf in just those 6 starts. Looking at how Tulsa matches up here, this is a defense that's typically pretty good, but I was surprised to see they underperformed this season. One saving grace in this matchup, though, is they do specialize in stopping the run. They got a great linebacking core. They can be exposed deep. With Hayden Wolf, Old Dominion's quarterback, averaging less than 8 yards per attempt, I really don't see Old Dominion being able to expose Tulsa's flaws in their secondary. As for this Tulsa offense, you want to talk about inconsistency. Their quarterback, Davis Brin, 16 touchdowns. That doesn't sound too bad. 16 interceptions. And he's had multiple games. Most of the times he's throwing interceptions, it's not just one. He's had multiple games this year where he's got 2, 3 interceptions. They really stack up. So he's really hit or miss. He is averaging almost 250 yards per game, but completion percentage below 60%, yards per attempt below 8. Pretty unreliable quarterback. This Golden Hurricane offense, they run with quite a bit of pace, almost 75 plays per game, yet they average just 26 points per game. So something's off there with that offense, and I think a lot of it is, Brin and his inability to protect the football. Looking at Tulsa's running game, they are committed to the run. If you look at their leading rusher, Sean Brooks, 922 yards this season, just 4.8 yards per carry. And it's interesting because you look at the 2 guys behind him, Anthony Watkins and Deneric Prince. Prince is 5.4 yards per carry. Watkins, 579 yards, 7.6 yards per carry. I will say this, since Sean Brooks is a senior, I doubt that head coach Philip Montgomery is going to, yank carries from him in his last college game. But, there's plenty of depth there in that Tulsa running back room. Should be able to run the ball quite well here. As far as the Tulsa offensive line, total wild card in my mind. They've had great games this year. They've had really bad games this year. And that's just kind of the theme for this team and specifically this offense. Just very inconsistent, very hard to get a good read about, who they are and what they're going to do in this game. I will say, though, this should be a pretty easy matchup for Tulsa. If you look at Old Dominion defense, they're allowing almost 28 points per game this season, and that's considering that they play in the Conference USA. They allowed 45 to Liberty, 42 to Wake Forest, 43 to Western Kentucky. So when they're playing some of their better competition, this is not a defense that's getting too many stops. And, we talked about Davis Brin and his knack for turning the football over. But, looking at this Old Dominion defense, they created just 14 turnovers this season. So I wouldn't worry about that as much for Brin in this matchup, but it's still something you've definitely got to keep your eye on. As far as a pick in this game, if I had to lean total-wise, I'd probably lean over just for the sheer fact that both of these teams do use a little bit of tempo. Both in the top quarter of the country. And that statistic, total at 52.5, that's pretty low. We have talked about it though. Pretty inefficient offenses at times. Not a lot of explosive plays, so that would probably keep me off of that. As far as a side though, I really don't want to lay almost double digits with a team like Tulsa, but I don't think they'll have much trouble winning this game, to be honest with you. They are 9.5 point favorites, so you wouldn't take them on the money line unless you were, parlaying it with something else. I do like money line parlays at times. I've kind of gone on a cold streak there in college football, but I really don't see Old Dominion winning this game. Tulsa's gotten hot towards the end of the year, and it's against good competition. I mentioned they go on the road, they beat SMU. If you did want to throw a money line parlay together, I do think Tulsa would be a safe play there. All right, guys, moving on to Tuesday, December 21st. Really, really good matchup here. We got UTSA facing off against San Diego State. This is a night game, 6:30 p.m. Central. This is the Frisco Bowl at Toyota Stadium. And right now we're seeing UTSA as 2.5 point favorites and a total at 49.5. Really good season for UTSA. Finished the year at 12-1, won the Conference USA, picked up nice wins over Illinois, Memphis, and then they beat Western Kentucky twice, which, as y'all know from earlier in this video, I'm pretty high on Western Kentucky. But just a really good season for Jeff Traylor there in year two. As far as San Diego State, they had a pretty good regular season as well. Finished 11-1. But as I mentioned during that Utah State breakdown, they got absolutely steamrolled in the Mountain West championship game. Their only regular season loss was to Fresno State, so not a bad loss by any means. Looking at UTSA's offense here first, really good this year. Averaging almost 38 points per game this year. Good for 21st in the country. They convert 45% of the time on third down, and they run at a pretty fast pace as well, almost 75 plays per game. Quarterback Frank Harris. This is another team, and I told you it was going to be a theme. We got a lot of run-heavy teams in this video. He's averaging just 223 yards per game through the air. 25 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. Great ratio there. Pretty efficient, completing 66% of his passes. And right at 8 yards per attempt, so slightly above average in my mind. The most notable guy from this Roadrunner offense is definitely running back Sincere McCormick. Carried the ball 299 times this year. That is absolutely wild to think about, especially in this day and age. Totaled almost 1,500 yards on the ground, but really when you look at it, averaged less than 5 yards per carry. I tend to think he's somewhat overrated. Obviously, if you're carrying the ball, almost 300 times, those yards are going to add up pretty easily, but, just 4.9 yards per attempt. Not really anything that stands out to me. UTSA is also really good up front. They allowed just 13 sacks this season, so pretty physical team up front, and that does allow McCormick to move the chains for them and for that offense to keep rolling. I'll say this, though. This San Diego State defense is no joke. Averaging less than 20 points per game this season, and they specialize in stopping the run too. And so that's why I bring up McCormick's numbers as far as that 4.9 yards per attempt, because that might not play against a really good defense like San Diego State. This is playing in the Mountain West. They faced some good competition this year, and not only can they stop the run, but this San Diego State defense can create some pressure on the quarterback too. So I think this UTSA team, specializing in the run and up front, I think they're going to get challenged a little bit here. As far as the San Diego State offense goes, nothing real special here. Very slow-paced team. Run just 66.8 plays per game, so 106th in college football. Averaging 26.5 points per game. Nothing really to look at there. I'll say this. They're horrible on third down. 31.3% conversion rate on third down. That's bottom of the barrel when you look at the rest of the country. They've got a little bit of a quarterback controversy heading into this game. They got Lucas Johnson and Jordan Brookshire, who've both taken key snaps this year. I believe Brookshire was the backup for most of the year, and then he came in and started that Mountain West Championship game and didn't look too good. Obviously, they got beat by 33. So I'd imagine they look towards Johnson here. Just looking at his season, 61% completion, 9 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, but 5.8 yards per attempt. So this guy and Brookshire just 7 yards per attempt himself. So this is a passing offense that really shouldn't that really UTSA shouldn't have to worry much about. UTSA is coming off that game against Western Kentucky where they got Bailey Zappi throwing all over the place. A totally different matchup here. These quarterbacks don't present much of a threat at all. As far as the San Diego State running game, much like UTSA, very high volume. Greg Bell got 221 carries, but just 4.5 yards per carry. And while this UTSA defense is somewhat inconsistent, I mean, they allowed 31 to UAB. I wrote down 23 to UTEP. I guess that's not too bad, but this is a defense that's kind of been up and down. I would lean the under in this game. I think UTSA is going to be able to get stops, but you can't ignore how good San Diego State's defense has been this season. They're averaging less than 20 points per game in the Mountain West. I think that's pretty respectable right there. So we're seeing a total at 49.5. I think really what makes me feel confident in that is, not many of UTSA's opponents have been able to really hold down McCormick this year. I mean, like really shut him down. I think San Diego State can do that. So if quarterback Frank Harris is forced into, these third and long, obvious passing downs, I think we see him be less efficient. Then from there, really, San Diego State's really able to dictate the pace of this game. So if I had to play this right now, I'd play it under. I really want to play San Diego State here. Their offensive numbers are just so bad that, quarterback play is terrible. Converting at just 31% on third down, I can't bet on that. I wish I could, but I can't. I think the best way to play this game is probably under. I'd expect it to maybe come down a little bit, 49.5. This might be a good number to go ahead and grab it at. Still got almost a week till the game, so I might not lock it up right yet. But, this is an under I do see quite a bit of value with. All right, guys, 2 more games left. We're moving to Wednesday here, December 22nd, 7 p.m. Central. This is a good one. Army against Missouri. It's the Armed Forces Bowl. This will be played at Amon G. Carter Stadium, which is where TCU plays. Right now, this might be surprising to some people, but we're seeing Army as 3.5-point favorites here over the SEC team in Missouri, and we're seeing a total pretty standard 57.5. Now, looking at Army, I'd say a pretty good 8-4 season for them. Good wins over Western Kentucky and Liberty. And then in their tougher Power 5 games against, Wisconsin and Wake Forest, they were right in it in both of those games as well. But as we all saw this past weekend in that Army-Navy game, I can't imagine this team has too good of a taste in their mouth. Lost to 3-8 Navy. I'm sure this team is actually ready to get back on the field and kind of end the season on the right note. It's also worth noting that head coach Jeff Monken is 3-1 in bowl games. So and that kind of follows the stereotype that a team like Army is typically not going to lack motivation in this spot, especially playing an SEC team. You might be surprised to see a team like Missouri underdogs against a team like Army. This is a pretty mediocre Missouri team. Finished the year at 6-6. Pretty uneventful season for them. They basically beat everybody they were supposed to, and they were pretty uncompetitive against much of their superior competition. They did pick up a nice win against Florida late, but as we all know, that Florida team kind of quit towards the end of the year under Dan Mullen. And other than that, really no other good win for the Tigers this year. Typically in Army games, they're going to dictate the pace of the game. Much slower paced team. They obviously still run the triple option. They've actually been quite successful with it this year. Averaging 33.6 points per game. This is a team that was putting up points week after week. One thing they do really well is convert on third down. Almost 48% conversion rate puts them at 16th in the country on third down efficiency. Right on par with what most triple option teams do. The quarterback Christian Anderson, he's attempted just 15 passes this season, but very effective in the run game. Almost 600 yards, almost 6 yards a carry, and he's added 7 touchdowns as a runner. I'll say this, one guy to watch out for. I know Anderson's attempted just 15 passes, but Army's got a nice weapon on the outside. Wide receiver Isaiah Alston, 6'4", 200-pound receiver on the outside, like I said, averaging 22 yards per catch this season. So I know Army's a very monotonous offense with that triple option, but they will throw deep on you. They'll try to catch Missouri by surprise, probably multiple times in this game. Looking at this Missouri defense this season, really bad. Really, really bad. Allowed almost 35 points per game. Dreadful against the run. Arguably the worst run defense in the Power 5. And that gives me a lot of doubts whether they're going to be able to handle this triple option because, you've got to stay really disciplined in your run lanes playing against a team that's just going to run the ball down your throat. I know Missouri hasn't faced an offense like this, but they've just been so bad against the run. I have low hopes about how they'll handle a team like Army, averaging almost 35 points a game. I think Army's going to be able to put some points on the board here. I was pretty high on Missouri's offense coming into the season. Somewhat let me down a little bit. Averaged just a tick shy of 30 points per game this season. They go with a lot more tempo than obviously a team like Army. If you look at their quarterback, Connor Bazelak, somewhat of an up and down year. Averaged 231 yards per game, had 16 touchdowns, but once again, double-digit interceptions, finished with 11 interceptions. And the one thing about Bazelak too, just 6.8 yards per attempt. So lots of dinks and dunks, lots of standard passes, not a lot of explosive plays over the top with him. I'll say the one thing with Missouri though, great running game. If you look at running back Tyler Beatty, over 1,600 yards on the ground this year, 14 touchdowns, 6 yards a carry in the SEC. That is incredible. Tip your cap to Tyler Beatty because he's been able to run the ball extremely well this year. 6 yards per carry in the SEC is incredible. Army's defense does allow just 22 points per game, and did step up at some pretty key spots this year. Allowed 16 to Liberty, 20 to Wisconsin, 35 to Western Kentucky. But on the other hand, they play a team like Wake Forest and they give up 70. So it's kind of a boom or bust situation in my mind. I tend to think that they'll have some success, just given that Missouri hasn't been able to throw the ball vertically much this season. But at the end of the day, I think with Missouri's commitment to the run game with Beatty, I think that's going to open up some things for the rest of the offense. And I think Missouri could have some success here. This line, in my mind, tells you something. They're putting Army -3.5 out there. They want you to be on Missouri here. Mentally, they want you to take that 3 and a hook and think you're getting value here. I tend to think that Army's going to be able to run the ball all over Missouri. Like I said, basically all of Missouri's opponents that were worth anything were able to move the ball at will against them. Even Vanderbilt moved the ball well against them. So I think Army's going to have some success here. I would lean towards the Army side. Like I said, these games are still a week out. I'm filming this on Wednesday afternoon, so this is still a week out. So I'm not going to make anything official right now. But right now, I definitely lean towards that Army side. I would also lean the over too. I just said that I think Army will have some success offensively, but at the end of the day, with the tempo, you'd have to think Missouri gets some things going offensively themselves. So sitting at 57.5, I would lean the over. I don't think that's going to make my card. If I were to play something in this game, I think I'd lay the points with Army. This is an offense, triple option teams. They have their narratives, they have their stereotypes. This is a really effective offense, and I know Missouri's in the SEC, but they can't stop the run. So if I had to play this right now, I'm going to wait a little bit, like I said. I'd have to lay the points with Army. All right, guys, last game we're going to cover in this video. There is one game on Christmas Day. I don't have an opinion on it. I believe it's Georgia State, Ball State. I'm not going to have an opinion on that game, so this will be the last game of the video. This is a really interesting matchup. This is Thursday night. December 23rd, kicking off at 6 p.m. Central Time. We got the Gasparilla Bowl. It's in Tampa, Florida. We got two Florida teams, Florida and Central Florida. We got the Gators here laying 6.5, and the total right now is at 55.5. Obviously, there's a lot to get to in this game, especially on that Florida side. Incredibly disappointing 6-6 season for the Gators. Obviously, they made the SEC championship game last year. They made the Cotton Bowl. To follow that up and go 6-6, your head coach gets fired. It was a team that obviously quit towards the end of the year at a certain point after that Georgia game. And kind of to follow suit, we've seen 4 of their players already opt out, and their young quarterback, Anthony Richardson, will be out of this game too. So I know Billy Napier might get that turned around, but, this team still has one more game this year, and the optics don't look great for Florida entering this matchup. As for Central Florida, I was surprised to see they went 8-4, just because from following them, I thought they had a pretty disappointing year, to be honest with you. Now I'll give them some slack. It's still year 1 under Gus Malzahn, and they did lose Dylan Gabriel, their quarterback, to a season-ending injury pretty early. But this team in their bigger games just got totally blown out of the water. Lost 56-21 to Cincinnati. And then also lost 55-28 to SMU late in the year. So, just from where UCF was just a few years ago, I consider it a disappointing season. And one other thing to consider this, and I think this is somewhat important because it shows you how some coaches prepare for bowl games differently than others. But Gus Malzahn, from his time at Auburn, 2-5 in bowl games, and he has some good teams at Auburn too. So that's just something to consider. I know they're the underdog here. It's a little different environment, but just something to consider. We talked a little bit about Florida quarterback Anthony Richardson, who's not going to play in this game, but they will have Emory Jones available to play. Uh, really, this Florida offense wasn't that bad this year. Averaged almost 32 points per game. That's nothing to shake your head at all. As far as Jones, though, and we've seen this as a theme with some of the disappointing teams this year. Yeah, he has 215 yards per game, has 19 touchdowns, but 13 interceptions. I mean, those will kill you. Other than that, though, 68% completion, 8.3 yards per attempt, and he added almost 700 yards on the ground as well. I mean, Jones really, really had a good year in every other department except for that turnover category. As far as this Florida running game, very, very deep running back room. Nothing that's really going to jump out at you, but I do think it is sustainable, especially in this kind of matchup. I will say Dan Mullen at times would just kind of abandon the run game, and we've only seen Florida play once without Mullen. It was in that rivalry game against a pretty good defense in Florida State. So I think the verdict is still out on kind of what approach this Florida team is going to take. Are they going to kind of go run heavy and try to take some of the load off Jones? I think that's still yet to be seen. It's also worth noting that Florida's top wide receiver, Jacob Copeland, did enter the transfer portal. And this was already somewhat of a shallow group during the season. So that kind of makes me think that Florida will try to pound the rock a little bit, take some of the pressure off Jones. This UCF defense was really bad 1 year ago, but they actually kind of outperformed my expectations this year. Allowed right at 25 points per game this season. They are good up front, and they're going to need to be. You can say what you want about Florida, but they do have a good offensive line. I do think UCF will be able to match up with them somewhat well. That being said, though, UCF has showed out more in more manageable matchups. They've also gotten burned. We mentioned the Cincinnati game. We mentioned the SMU game. I think the potential is there for Florida to put up some points, but part of me just wonders what kind of approach they're going to use, and it's kind of hard to know. This kind of being a one-off game, a new staff's about to come in. Will they just kind of throw their hands up and just let Emory Jones throw the ball? Are they going to run the ball? I really don't know, but I do think the potential is there for Florida to have a good game offensively. I mentioned Dylan Gabriel's injury earlier. It's kind of funny to think about. This UCF team under Josh Heupel last year, who's now obviously the head coach at Tennessee, they moved at the fastest pace in the country back in 2020. This year, under Gus Malzahn, this UCF offense running just 65.9 plays per game, good for 111th in college football. So a total style change on this offense. Not very efficient either, converting just 38.6% of the time on third down. It just wasn't a very good offense this year. Once Gabriel went down, they really had to rely on freshman quarterback Mikey Keene, who, as we've seen, definitely needed more development before being thrown into the fire. Keene had some respectable numbers, 63.6% completion, 16 touchdowns. He actually took care of the ball pretty well too. Just 6 interceptions, but with the yards per attempt at 6.3, 6.3 yards per attempt, that's not scaring many defenses. This is not a guy as some big downfield threat, kind of a dink and dunk guy, and I don't imagine Florida's going to be too scared of him entering this matchup. UCF has been able to run the ball a little bit this year, but much like their quarterback situation, had to deal with some injuries there. Isaiah Bowser has gone down multiple times this year. That was a guy that came on really strong at the beginning of the season. He's actually in line to be back for this game, so pair him with Jason Richardson, and I think Bowser could be a pretty nice compliment to him. As far as this UCF O-line, held up mostly well in the American this year, but against SMU they allowed 6 sacks, so that shows that the potential is there for a pass rush in Florida. Who, if you can knock a lot about this Florida defense. The Florida pass rush is good, and it's pretty much remained good throughout most of the season. So I would expect Florida to get some pressure on true freshman quarterback Mikey Keene, but I really just don't know how Florida's going to match up against the UCF run game. I mean, Florida, we saw their defense kind of crumble at the end of the year, but then they step up in the last game of the year against Florida State, win that game 24-21, somewhat of a low-scoring game. We know their secondary is somewhat vulnerable. UCF is not a team that's built to really exploit that. If UCF is going to have success, it's going to have to be on the ground. And frankly, I just don't have a great feel at this point. We're still 8 days out from this game, so my feelings may change here, but I just wonder how much does Florida defensively, how intense are they willing to be entering this matchup? Looking at the side in this game, I mean, it's one of those games. Florida, talent-wise, is 6.5 points better than UCF in my mind. So they should win this game. I will say though, I mean, we saw them, almost lose to Samford, uh, late in the season. We saw them lose to South Carolina. We saw them lose to Missouri. We saw them give up 49 to LSU. This is not a team that you should be trusting at this point in the season. I do think Billy Napier will come in and kind of weed out some of the bad characters there, but this is a team that's proven, I just named 4 separate occasions this year where they've completely let down. I also think that the total in this game is tough too, because I think so much of it is dependent on what Florida are we going to get. And like I said, they've let us down multiple times. If we get a good Florida effort here, I could see a UCF team total under. I think that coming probably around 24.5, which is a key number. I wouldn't mind playing that under. I just kind of want to gauge maybe here in the week leading up to this game what kind of effort are we going to get from Florida. And of course, we won't know until game time because of course their interim coach will say they're ready to play and all that. We just won't know until we see it, right? That's really the only way I could look in this game. This UCF offense, I think, probably most people still think that they're somewhat explosive. They're really not. They're slow paced. They don't have a good quarterback. And I think Florida can match up with them well in the run game if they're ready to play. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's video. I appreciate you sticking with me. If you made it all the way through, like I said, I hope those timestamps help. If you just wanted to hear about certain games, you can just go to the description, obviously, and just kind of flip over as you please. But yeah, I appreciate everybody watching. I understand that this is my first YouTube video on here. I expect to get a lot more tech savvy with this. I'll probably add an intro, probably make things more official. But I did want to get these plays out. Like I said, I'll be back on December 26th. That'll be part 2 of this 3-part series. And then I'll be back with part 3 closer to New Year's Day as we get in some of the really big bowl games. So, guys, I appreciate you watching. Like I said, links in the description below to my Twitter, to my premium membership page, as well as to my free play page. So I appreciate all your support. Feel free to comment below if you have anything to say about today's video, any of my breakdowns, if you have anything to add. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.